Hey everybody, Stephen Whittier, 40 plus BJJ. Welcome. If you have not seen me online before, this is my group, and I just wanted to jump on here. It's been a few weeks since I did a question of the week or fielded anything, so I wanted to jump on and talk because there was a good new thread that came up yesterday, I believe it was, that I said I would jump on. This question comes up, like so many of them, on a repeated basis. And basically, it has to do with how much of your physical attributes should you be using when you're basically practicing jiu-jitsu, doing jiu-jitsu. And I wanted to come on, so I've addressed this in numerous forms before. I've written about it extensively. It's been part of the conversation since I started this program of mine back in 2011, but I wanted to touch on it again. So this particular question was framed like this. It has to do with the role of strength in grappling or jiu-jitsu. So Kevin writes, I have a question for the more experienced players. I've been told that we shouldn't use strength to get out of a technique. We should have patience, work towards the best counter, etc. However, in a tournament, we only have so much time to play. I believe that some escapes require a setup, which comes from making your opponent move slightly so you can get into the escaping position more easily. Can anyone elaborate on this? Okay, so that was the question. It was specific to how much strength to use when trying to execute a technique, but the reference point for that was tournament competition and time limits. All right, so that's important to factor into the conversation, because then what happens inevitably with these conversations is then you start going through and everybody starts just talking about strength and jiu-jitsu and what's the relationship. All right, so I want to talk about strength in general as a physical attribute and how much of a role should that play in your jiu-jitsu in the broadest terms. And then I'll also address, and I'm not the only one, I've seen some others chiming in on this as well, but I'm also going to address how that will change once we're dealing with a competitive situation, tournament situation, okay? So first thing, I recommend that I have a few links to share with people, which I'll put in the comments here after I post this recording of this live video. But one thing to check out in the group description of this group is another live stream I did that is called Response to Old Man Jiu-Jitsu is Nonsense Criticism, Important Clarification. So you can look that up, because I spoke about this to some degree there as well, because a black belt had come on and was basically saying there's this, old man grappling genre out there, and I guess I would be lumped into that. And he basically says, it's crazy. It's like there's no old man, there's no jiu-jitsu that's different as you get older, and I still want to be at 40 years old doing cartwheels and doing all the physical tricks, so on and so forth, and saying that's important. And basically, this has nothing to do with me or the person that wrote this article, which was published and made some circles. I was just saying, I think, I don't know what the other people who have, older jiu-jitsu, like I know there's one that's like called BJJ over 40, and it's like, guy's over 40, but he's doing all these like super acrobatic, super tricky, nuanced, very particular to his own style type of techniques. That couldn't be more different than what I do. There's people, like myself and, Henry, Henry Akins and Kieran and Henner, so on and so forth, that have programs out there that are sort of like more of a jiu-jitsu that's universal to everybody. And my particular thing is talking about how you can still optimize your jiu-jitsu well into your later years and not only continue to get better, but be able to kind of even the score, so to speak, against people that do have superior physical attributes to you. And I also talk a lot, and I think this is one of the things that's pretty unique about my program, is I talk a lot about some of the ancillary topics that come up about when you are an older grappler, especially if you're not in a club, as most aren't, with tons of other people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, so on and so forth. Like, there's a lot of unspoken dynamics that go on there, a lot of frustrations, a lot more time sometimes dealing with injuries, a lot more responsibilities in your life, so less time to dedicate to training, so on and so forth, right? So there's all these other things that come into play. And honestly, when I've gotten messages over the years, I've been shocked at how much training methodology, frustrations, social dynamics within training, all that stuff has factored into people's experience. And so a lot of times when people are consulting me, it's about those things, not only about technical development. Anyway, that being said, I'll come back. Check out that, again, the title is Response to Old Man Jiu-Jitsu is Nonsense Criticism, parentheses, important clarifications. That is in the group description. That will elaborate more on what I'll talk about today. So how much strength to use? So my basic thesis here, as others have already pointed out, is when you're talking about how much strength to use in jiu-jitsu in general, not training specifically for your A-game execution at this point in your development to go win a tournament, the amount of strength you should use, the answer is always this: only ever just enough. And that only ever just enough is going to change over time if you are practicing diligently and training diligently and trying not to just accumulate techniques and technical sequences and new positions, but you're truly trying to go deeper rather than broader. And you're truly trying to solve the problems that you face on the mat with your training partners or your opponents. When you go back and you analyze how you can do things better, you're trying to solve those problems always on the perspective of technique. Now, timing may come into play, of course, because higher level of execution is often technique plus timing, but that's where you should be problem solving as much as possible. And you've got to ask yourself if the answer to a technical problem is a temporary solution or something that is kind of fixed in time, like what are my physical capabilities at this moment in time that have to do with my physical attributes that I bring to the table, then what you're basically saying is you are, again, as others have pointed out, you are patching holes in your technical development, right? So I only ever want to use strength just enough, and hopefully if we were to fast forward a year from now, just enough is going to be a different measure than it is right now, because I will be refining my technique. And that means I'll be refining my technique and my timing and my execution, creating better levers, more leverage, better connection, so on and so forth. I'll be doing that at a high level even as I age, and no matter how much I try and stay in shape, eventually time does catch us all, right, and our physical capabilities diminish somewhat, so I can still get better. So in other words, there is an inverse relationship here between how much you rely on physical attributes and your technical development. And when people are purely focused just on the result, right, and a lot of people kind of say, oh, it's, the only thing that matters is result, everything else is you're bullshitting yourself. What's the frame of reference you're having that conversation? Because I'm not about making excuses. What I'm talking about is, if all that matters is the win, okay, which should be your objective if you're competing, right, to some extent, right? Don't go in there saying, well, yeah, I'm just doing it for the experience. Okay, great. That's your ultimate thing. It's just personal growth, right? But if you're committing to go into a tournament, like, you're going in there not to do anything but win at that moment, right? So that being said, that's cool if that's what we're talking about. Another frame of reference, though, is just jiu-jitsu. So to my thing that I always talk about to people, especially 40 plus, right? The ultimate goal of Brazilian jiu-jitsu is to continue to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu for as long as possible, or whatever form of grappling you do, right? This is a lifelong journey of mastery, and that lifelong journey begins at whatever age you begin, period, right? And then hopefully continue to do it forever. Not put yourself into a relationship with it where you're going to be really physical, maybe you're one of those guys that's just still a stud athlete or super strong, and you can just crank away, beat up on all the young guys, and have like this little heyday, and then you're all arthritic and jacked up, and you relied on your attributes. So then by the time you're 65 or whatever, you got to throw in the towel and just be like an older version of a high school guy that just talks about the glory days back when. No, if I'm still ambulatory, man, I still want to do jiu-jitsu to whatever capacity. So how much strength? Just enough. Now, a lot of people here, this is where we get into dodgy. I'm still talking about jiu-jitsu in general, not competition right now. So a bunch of people have come on and said, this implies that, or they've come on and said something effective, hey, strength is just another tool. Like, there's strength, there's technique, there's cardio, there's flexibility. Sorry. That is not correct, because what you're doing when you say that is you're putting physical attributes like flexibility, speed, explosive power, static strength, like grip strength, you're putting that all on the same level as technique. But again, there's an inverse relationship between technical execution and reliance on physical attributes. So the more that you rely on physical attributes, that's telling me that you're more just focused on the result. Focus on the result, good for competition because you should be going in to win. Non-competition, you should have a bigger perspective than that. You should be focused on getting better, solving problems, learning, developing your jiu-jitsu to the highest level, addressing areas that are not as strong for you in your game, making sure there's no technical holes, not just being, say, I'm really gnarly at passing the guard and smashing people on top. Do I have an open guard? No, right? Man, with me, if you are a gnarly guard passer and top player as a purple belt, and you can pass black belt guards and tap out black belts as a purple belt, but you have no open guard, or your open guard is like a white belt or a low blue belt open guard, guess what? You don't get a brown belt, because you're going to have your preferences, but you have to be a brown belt everywhere, in my estimation, to get a brown belt. There should be no large holes. I don't care what type of guard you play. I don't care what type of passes you use per se. I don't care what type of finishes you like on top. But you have to have the ability to play, minus reliance on your physical attributes, a technical game in all major areas of jiu-jitsu at a brown belt level if you're going to get a brown belt from me, right? So that's just the way I look at it. And so fundamentally, although every student on my floor, because they all learn fundamentals for the most part that are pretty much fundamental principles that are universal to everybody, not style specific, then that gives them tons of freedom to be able to develop their own personal routes. So I have the inverters and the spinners and the leg lockers, and I have the, you name it. I've got every sort of type of person on the floor that you could have asked for. But when you see those branches of games that are, you'd be, oh, that person plays like a meow, or that person plays it. They didn't learn that because I taught them those sequences. They learned that because they were able to have a fundamentally sound jiu-jitsu that then they figured out through the laboratory of training with each other and trying things out and learning things, bring it back, and they're able to work on those roots themselves and find out the style that is specific to them. Where we get into trouble is if I taught them Stephen Whittier jiu-jitsu and I have a particular style, like say I'm Mr. De La Hiva and leg weave passing or something. So I teach everybody how to play De La Hiva and leg weave passing. And what I've basically done is sabotage the technical development of probably at least 3/4 of the room, if not more than that, because they may have a completely different physicality to me, completely different way that they think about jiu-jitsu, right? I've just imposed that on them. And some really famous, amazing competitors, world champion competitors, do that, and they never know that they're shortchanging their students. And they'll always have a few gnarly people that can play their same game, that are great athletes and stuff, but a lot of people are going to be like, man, this is really hard. because they're trying to teach them their own style. So anyway, technique is not just another tool, okay? It becomes more of a factor when we switch the conversation to competition, right? To preparing for some specific event where the goal shifts from optimal learning development in the broadest sense to a very specific goal, which is winning under a certain rule set. That's where, yeah, we do come into the conversation that now strength and conditioning do matter, and now you see the top players are all, pretty built, whether or not they're on, high doses of steroids or something, which is another thing, but they are all engaging in a high level of strength and conditioning. One of the guys, Stephen Wong, had a good post where he's like, well, what, he kind of engaged the semantic aspect of it. What are you talking about when you mean strength vis-a-vis technique? Are you talking about trying to generate maximum leverage and, power through the leverage with your prime movers, like using back, glutes, hips, things like that, your legs, as opposed to like just trying to push people off you? Well, yeah, in that case, then strength is part of technique, but that's not what most people are talking about when they're talking about strength. And he also makes the point that to address the original question about escaping under time limits and things like that and how that factors into strength, it's like, training yourself, and this is where, again, timing in technique at the higher levels comes into play. The earlier you can attain the proper physical structure or posture, so doing that, attaining the optimal or close to optimal physical posture during transitions, so you don't get fully locked down and then try and escape, that's just material reality, right? We have to deal with that. Where else does strength become a factor? There aren't weight classes in a self-defense situation. Somebody much bigger and stronger than you, comes and just out of the blue just bull rushes you and tackles you and takes you to the ground because they played high school football and, bench press 400 pounds, and you're not nearly their size, man. You're probably getting taken off your feet, and you're going to wind up on your back, and then, have you prepared not just how to, get a pant leg grip and spin underneath them and try and bear and bowl them, but have you trained in a situation where you know how to protect yourself in that situation against stronger people who are they're like, fuck jiu-jitsu, man, I'm just going to try and beat your head in. Well, I'd rather know only sport jiu-jitsu than nothing, because chances are, I'm still going to have the edge in those cases. But if you prepared actually, so you know how to either create maximum closeness, attachment, or maximum distance, and how to keep yourself safe when somebody's throwing punches and things like that, if that's in your skill set, then your concerns are going to be more psychological, just about, holy shit, there's a huge guy trying to beat my head, and then they're going to be physical because you know how to protect yourself. Right, so it's not that strength doesn't matter in that circumstance, but it's just, again, like, you can still overcome it with proper technique. Where it comes highly into play, though, is, yes, all other things being equal, right, we're both X belt, we've both been training for X years, we're in the same weight category, it's competition, so all other things being equal, if we're supposed to be roughly in the same bracket based on technique, then strength absolutely can matter. We've all had the guy in training that has that, groundskeeper Willie grip strength, where even when you go like 2-on-1 and kick one way and pull the other, and they have got a pant leg grip, it doesn't break, right? So then what do? Well, you find the solution, but the solution isn't to go do higher weight leg presses and more grip exercises. The solution is going to always be a technical solution that has minimal reliance on strength. The way I always like to frame this, and another thing, Jim Cesura, if I'm pronouncing it well, had a nice line where he says, somebody's saying, I've yet to train with a high-level practitioner, like a good black belt who isn't strong as shit. And so Jim came on and had a great line, which was, or good technique feels like strength, which is also very true. Feel very heavy, very connected, very strong in your positions, but in reality, It has to do with just a high level of feel, weight distribution, connection, being in the right place, creating better levers, better frames, so on and so forth. So the way that I always like to talk about this subject is in terms of building equity, all right? So, and there's, I'm sure people are much smarter about finance than I am, but along the lines of heavy reliance on any physical attribute, even if we were substituting flexibility, so on and so forth, versus technique that is as minimally reliant on those as possible. Just think of it like this, you know, if I am looking to have a minimum amount of hours in the week that I can put into this practice, this journey of trying to master as much of this art as possible within my lifetime, given the time and attention I can put into it, then wouldn't it make sense that my main objective for my training time will be to put equity in the bank of training in such a way that I can maintain and improve this this technical journey over time. And within that frame, let's say it takes place over 40 years, 50 years, whatever, if we're lucky. Some of us it may be shorter if we started really late. But within that time, there may be some peaks and valleys where, you know, I'm training specifically for tournament style as an objective for a certain amount of time. And so things shift, and I am more physical as I kind of lead up to the competition. And when I'm in the tournament, I'll use whatever I have, but hopefully it's not because you've created technical holes that you're masking with strength or flexibility, but you're accentuating during the competition itself, like you can bring those things to the table as well, but you're not relying on them because you shelved as much as possible the physical attributes during that. But broadly speaking, outside of training specifically for competition, you have trained yourself in such a way that you're not going to have to start learning, for all intents and purposes, a new jiu-jitsu once your competition days or your younger days where you have these great ability to explode, to be super quick, to fold your leg behind your head, all this stuff. You didn't rely on that for your game. Because the thing is, there are some very famous people that you look up to that have had games that are very much reliant on a specific strategy or set of attributes or both that already have, as a result, really bad backs or really bad necks or really bad shoulders, so on and so forth, and are either at the point or are coming up on the point where they can't play that game anymore. And so what's going to happen is, for all intents and purposes, they'll still be respected for the rest of their lives as somebody who was great, that had this great kind of very particular skill set that gave high-level opponents a lot of trouble, but they're going to have to do different jiu-jitsu, or some of them may just retire from doing it at all, and if they still have any relationship to it, it may just be, you know, coaching or something. But if you still want to be able to do it, my thing is, unless you're sort of like a pro athlete competitor that your main objective is always just win a world championship or whatever, and you're willing to pay the price later on to get to that objective, your main goal should be to, again, continue to do jiu-jitsu. So play jiu-jitsu in such a way that what you're doing today as a white belt, as a blue belt, so on and so forth, is something you'll continue to be able to do and refine and improve as a black belt, and then as an older black belt, whenever that comes, okay? So, you know, I'm just talking with, you know, week before last, Henry Akins was here, and we've talked about this a bunch, and he just did a great interview I just saw with Matt Thornton, my friend, and head coach of SBG, also, you know, been one of my coaches, and they get into this, and it's just, you know, the goal of jiu-jitsu should be effortless, you know, and one of the things Henry's talked about many times is actually being there with all those famous stories that aren't just stuff of legend like all the old, you know, guru martial arts stories, but, you know, those verifiable things, like Henry's actually there when Hickson had all these world champions and famous competitors come in, and he would in fact shut them down in a lot of cases, kind of make them seem like white belts or blue belts. And although he did have the body back then, because he was constantly prepared to take a fight, whether it's grappling or vale tudo, in a challenge match situation, because he had to carry basically he was the family champion, right? So he basically saw it as his duty to be ready at any time to take those challenges. But he was just training at his academy with his own students. He wasn't training on a pro team with a bunch of animals like all the current world champions were. And these were amazing, amazing guys. You know the stories, right? And yet they would come through, want to see what the buzz was about. Is this guy for real? And it was always the same result. So although Rickson had the body, he had the conditioning, he'd do the crazy gymnastica naturale and the yogic breathing and all that stuff, his main tool, as Henry said many times, was his mind and his technique. So his mentality and his technique and his ability to see jiu-jitsu on a level of depth that others couldn't. And so their understanding or their reference point for certain techniques that they thought they knew and knew well and were successful with, but he just was deeper. So in other words, he wasn't shutting people's games down and tapping them out because he had physical superior attributes, because these guys were all top of the food chain in that regard as well. He had superior technique. And although a lot of what is technique, if you looked at it from the outside without feeling it, you'd say it's basic. But as we know, basic isn't just basic, right? There's a very rabbit hole there. Beyond the basic technique, the matrix opens up. It's the same thing like, is Roger Gracie's X choke from mount, is that basic? Well, nobody can seem to stop it. So there it is, right? So that should be your goal. Your goal should be to make jiu-jitsu as effortless as possible. That doesn't mean lie to yourself, because if you have to deal with a factor like strength and it's a real thing, then you have to deal with that. But again, always try and solve the problem, not by making yourself stronger, because that's going to be a temporary fix. Try and solve the problem on a technical level. All right, let's see. By the way, for those of you who are in this group that haven't checked it out yet, make sure you check out, I have this free for the time being. It's in the announcements of the group and in the group description again, along with some other resources, is my skill development accelerator ebook and about an hour-long video workshop where I go through the whole process, right? So here's the thing that gets me, right? People belong to this group. They come on and they just like look at the memes or the videos or something, or they go on YouTube and they just like look up endless amount of techniques. But when I basically give away the farm of how to train to be better at any level, no matter who you're working out with, whose technique you admire, who your professor is, whatever, pretty much guarantee, and I have like umpteen number of proof statements from people all over the world who have checked out my stuff, and I give this away for free, and if you actually implement it in your game, it will help you get better. And I would be very surprised if you don't take something from it, even if you're a pretty experienced practitioner. It's been around and trained with a lot of good guys and everything. It's not to say I'm better than those guys by any way, shape, or form. Just saying this sort of, this is where my skill set comes into play, where training methodology, training approaches, and how to do what I've been basically talking about in this video comes into play. And I have, many years of many people, probably thousands of people now from all over, the world that have basically written me and said, thanks so much, this was game changer. So I basically give you the formula, the method. All my instructional material typically goes into like one area at a time, where I give you the concepts for that position, get into the game. I do so show some techniques, but again, I'm not teaching you my personal style. But there's the technical and the positional stuff, right? That's my instructional courses. But this particular one, it's free. You just opt in and you get the ebook and you'll get the video where I do the whole walkthrough, right? I'm just giving that away for you. That's the whole blueprint. I did have one other question, I believe, all we have for right now. Any decent blue belt can handle an untrained attacker, right? That old chestnut. And basically the question is, is there still truth to this, given that most attackers will have at least some level of grappling skill? Should strengthening and hardening of the body be a part of self-defense preparation? I mean, again, I always think it's good. But my goal for jiu-jitsu, and again, I say this in the response to the old man jiu-jitsu's nonsense criticism video, is that I eventually want to have it so that I can't rely on jiu-jitsu as a viable form of physical fitness. Or maybe it'll be tantamount to like a brisk like power walking routine or something, but it's not where my fitness training stops. And don't get me wrong, there's still times where I realize, yeah, I use too much energy in that roll because I'm really, breathing hard. But I want to be able to roll with other black belts for the most part, like where I really, at the end, like if I could literally fall asleep on them while playing Top Game or something and just nod off but still maintain good position, that would be my ideal, right? Like that's sort of the objective, is when you can play so relaxed and rely so much on your awareness of positioning and weight distribution and connection and superior leverage and everything, that you can just chill. That's a tall order. It's for sure a lofty ideal, but that's what I go for, which would then mean if I want to maintain my strength, my mobility, my fitness and everything to an optimum level, I'd have to do supplemental training. But I always recommend supplemental training. It provides injury prevention, takes care of your body, your engine for longer, which means you can be in the game for longer. I just don't want to rely on it for training, because those same guys that might have done a little grappling or might have learned a Muay Thai leg kick or whatever the case may be, right? Because everybody's got some exposure to it now, right? I'm still going to be superior to them in most cases based on my technical ability. Because again, it comes down, that's where I should be putting most of my emphasis when it comes to jiu-jitsu, whether it's for competition, self-defense, whatever. I should be putting most of my emphasis on what I rely on should be my technical development, because the other things are temporary and the other things may be overmatched by their, right? So you're asking, are you going to be overmatched by technique? Well, I hope not, because that would be a problem. And then maybe if they're, well, think of it this way, like what are the chances you're going to be attacked by somebody who's like way smaller than, weaker than you, who happens to know a little jiu-jitsu? It's probably going to be somebody who knows a little jiu-jitsu and they're bigger and stronger than you. So my best bet is not to try and out-strengthen and outweigh them, because what are the chances of that? My best bet is to be superior on the skill set. And then I supplement my conditioning and maintaining good joint health and everything with my supplemental training. But, main thing is I want to be efficient and I want to be effective with my technique. So I hope that answers that question. If there's anything else that anybody has you want to discuss, you can email me at info@40plusbjj.com, which is info@40 then the word plus bjj.com, or you can leave a message here in the group or in the comments. I'll try and hit you up. One other thing I've been doing, as I mentioned, I have a bunch of people that contact me more for things that aren't just technical questions, but setting up a technical strategy for yourself, game plan, technical development plan. Sometimes people come to me and they're like, everything you say about how you train makes sense, but they just don't do that at my academy, and I don't know how to handle that. Or you're talking about dynamics with your professor, other training partners. When people say only one out of every however many 100 people that ever start jiu-jitsu become a black belt, and then they'll spend all this time trying to seek out technical answers and stuff with again, YouTube, or buying instructionals, whether it's mine or anybody else's. That's great, but I think one of the main reasons, my experience, that people don't make it through, it's not just that they're all like weak and they couldn't hack it or something, right? It's like they face very legitimate challenges along the way up here, not just physical ones, or the physical can trigger psychological and emotional challenges, but they go unspoken because it's like seems like it's too weak or something to talk about it, and so everybody's response is always, just keep training. But it's like, but they don't just keep training, because some of these things really build up into serious things that take them off track. So I have a lot of those conversations with people now, and for sure over the years, more than I ever expected. So what I can also do, if you want to email me, I can set that up. So I do some coaching over, phone or Skype or whatever as well, and I can tell you how to do that if that's helpful. Because again, everybody wants to pay attention to the technical side, which for sure I can help you with, and the training methodology side, which I can help you with, set up a plan. But also sometimes there's other things you want to talk about, and most people don't. For whatever reason, it's like you're not going to go, I guess, like get a therapist or something to talk about your jiu-jitsu journey. But sometimes I find that's actually, in some way, shape, or form, those dynamics are what people need, but they need to talk about it from somebody that kind of understands what they're going through at their point in development. And so I'm happy to help you out with that as well. Okay, sometimes that's worth the private lesson, so to speak. So hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, guys. Take it easy.